My name is Binoliro Vince of Group T, and over here are my group mates. Vivicoy Maria Sara, Bustilio Eliza, Alburo Vance, Intia Alegna, Alandone Angeli, and Gabor Sheena.
In almost every industry, data are collected, analyzed, and interpreted to discover useful information, have informed conclusions, and support decision making. To display or report these informations, graphical representations are used, such as bar graphs, line graphs, and even scattered plots. These graphs are useful in presenting information and easy to understand without relying on high level of numerical analysis. Now, what would be the best type of graph to use in business presentations? The general rule of thumb here is that bar charts are the most commonly used type of graphs and should be your go-to choice for most data visualization. The members of this project aim to expand on the definition, types, and history of bar graphs, as well as to tap deeper into its usefulness through substantial information, example problems, and solutions.
After watching this video, you will be able to define the bar graph, understand its origin, recognize and differentiate the many forms of bar graphs. You're able to know the definition of terms used in the video. You'll learn the steps in solving, calculating, creating, and illustrating the bar graph. Quickly expressed relational information as the bars indicate the quantity for a certain category. You'll also be able to understand how to use this graph in presentations.
Before we start, there are 15 terms you should know. First in the list is the data. Second, graphical representations. Third, numerical analysis. Fourth, descriptive legend. Fifth, numerical data or information. Sixth, graphical analysis. Seventh, pattern recognition. Eight, categories. Nine, statistics. 10, categorical data. 11, discrete groups. 12, x-axis. 13, y-axis. 14, scale. Lastly, range. Those are the 15 terms you should know. So, let the game begins.
Today, bar charts and graphs are used everywhere. There are many forms and variations, but who invented them and where did they come from? Many sources credit William Playfair for inventing the bar chart. However, a Frenchman, Nicole Reisme, used a bar chart in a 14th century publication, The Latitude of Force, to plot the velocity of a constantly accelerating object against time.
In 1765, Joseph Priestley published a timeline type of graph which is he plotted the horizontal bars. Moving on 20 years, where William Playfair utilizes bar charts to show imports and exports of Scotland. This is the first example of numerical data being split into discrete groups and plotted as bars, and this is the reason why William Playfair is credited as the inventor of bar charts.
Ever wonder what's the definition of bar graph?
A bar chart or a bar graph is a chart or graph that represents categorical data with rectangular bars, and it has heights or lengths proportional to the values that they present.
As we all know, a bar graph is a chart that plots data using columns that represents the total amount of observation in the data for that categories. It can also be used to show comparison among categories. The bars can be plotted vertically or horizontal. A vertical bar chart is sometimes called a column chart. Bar graphs are commonly used in financial analysis for displaying data. The important thing to know is that the larger the bars, the greater its value.
Types of bar graph.
Bar graphs are mainly classified into two types, which is the horizontal bar graph and the vertical bar graph. Aside from vertical bar graph and horizontal bar graph, there are other two forms of bar graph to consider, which is the group bar graph and the stock bar graph. Vertical bar graphs are created when the provided data is displayed vertically in a graph or chart using rectangular bars that show the data measure. The rectangular bars are drawn vertically on the x-axis, and the value of the height of the rectangular bars, which reflects the amount of the variables written on the x-axis, is shown in the y-axis. Horizontal bar graphs are created when the provided data is displayed horizontally by utilizing rectangular bars that show the data measure. The variables or categories of the data must be recorded in this kind, and then the rectangular bars are horizontally displayed on the y-axis, with the x-axis showing the length of the bars equal to the values of the various variables included in the data. The composite bar graph is another name of the stock bar graph. It separates the entire bar into sections. In this case, each section of a bar is represented by a distinct color to make it easier to distinguish between the many categories. To indicate the various sections of the bar, special labeling is required. Thus, in a stock bar graph, each rectangular bars represents the entire graph, and each segments within the rectangular bar represent various sections of the entire graph. It may be shown either vertically or horizontally. The cluster bar graph is another name of the group bar graph. It displays the discrete value for two or more categorical data sets. Rectangular bars are grouped by position for levels of one categorical variable in this, with the same colors indicating the secondary category level inside each group. It can be shown vertically or horizontally.
Now that we have discussed the 4 different types of bar graph, let us find out the steps on how to illustrate them and a few sample problems. These are the steps in creating a bar graph. First, we have to decide on the title. Second, draw the horizontal axis and the vertical axis. Third, label the horizontal axis. Fourth, write the names on the horizontal axis. Fifth, label the vertical axis. Sixth, finalize the scale and range for the given data. And finally, draw the bar graph that should represent each category with their respective numbers. Similar steps are applied for the other types. However, it is important to note that for horizontal bar chart, the labels in the y and the x-axis of a vertical bar chart are switched. And for group bar chart, there should be 2 or more categorical data sets being represented. And of course, for the stacked bar graph, there are also 2 or more categorical sets being represented. However, instead of individual bars for the categorical data sets, we use 1 bar, and each bar in a standard chart is divided into a number of subbars. They are a bit confusing, right? But here, let us take a look at our different sample problems. Let us start with the most common and the standard vertical bar graph. So, a group of researchers conducted a survey in the university on the favorite subjects of 100 students. The study was done during the first semester, and they compared the data and results as shown below. So, step 1, we decide on the title of the bar graph. It should be clear and concise, should simplify data relations. Do not make it too wordy, but even so, it should be able to tell exactly what the graph is about. So for this example, the title is Favorite Subject of Students. Second, we have to draw the horizontal and vertical axis. Label the horizontal axis. So on a vertical graph, the horizontal axis should represent data categories. So for example, here we want to find the favorite subjects of students. Our label on the horizontal axis would be subjects. So step 4, we write the names on the horizontal axis. So we have subjects, math, English, science, and social studies. After labeling the horizontal axis, we label the vertical axis. Since we are talking about the vertical graph, we will find the scale and the range on the vertical axis. So for our example here, which is the number of students and their favorite subjects, we will label the vertical axis as number of students. Step 6, finalize the scale and range for the given data. So the range is 0 to 1,000 students, and you want the scale to be 1 unit is equals to 200 students. Remember that the scale should be equal for every number. So from 0, we have 200, 400, 600, and 800 to 1,000. And then finally, step 7, we draw the bar graph that should represent each category with their respective numbers. So for this example, their bars are level depending on the students that voted for the subject. So let's say the researchers wanted to find out which subject is the most favored among the 1,000 students. Just a quick glance at this bar graph, we can say that social studies is the most favored subject among the 1,000 students for that semester. Same fundamental steps are applied for a group bar chart that is a vertical orientation, but instead of having just one, there are 2 or more categorical dataset or 2 or more rectangles in a category. Let us take a look at this example. A clothing company released their first collection of clothing, shirts, pants, and hoodies. The owner wanted to analyze the performance of the sale using bar graph for the sale in 4 months, as shown here. So we already have the title, the horizontal and vertical axis. We already have labeled the horizontal axis. Since we want to find the sales for the months, the labels would be months. And the names are January, February, March to April, since there are 4 months for this problem. And for this example, which is the product sales in units, we will label the vertical axis as sales in units. After labeling that, we finalize the scale and the range for the given data. For the range, we have 0 to 600, and then we want the scale to be, for 1 unit, there are 200 units sold. So from 0 to 200 to 400, and then finally 600. Finally, draw the bars that represent each category. So we have shirt, pants, and hoodies. This bar graph is actually helpful for the company because, for example, for the next year, they wanted to know which item sold the most in January so they can produce more of that item. In this bar graph, we can see that for this year, January 2021, hoodies sold more than the rest of the products. For horizontal bar chart, actually the same steps are applied. However, the labels in the Y and X axis of a vertical bar chart are interchanged. So we have an example problem here. An accountancy student at Central Mindanao University was asked to present a bar chart on the number of BSA graduates from the years 2010 to 2020. The data was retrieved from the Department of Accountancy and are as shown below. So we have already decided on the title. The title is CMU BSA graduates. We already have drawn the horizontal and the vertical axis. And for step 3, remember that before we label the horizontal axis first, but for horizontal bar chart, we will label the vertical axis. So since we want to find the number of graduates for a particular year, our label on the vertical axis would be the years. Then step 4, we write the names on the vertical axis, which is the years from 2010 to 2020. And then we'll label the horizontal axis. For this example, we will label the horizontal axis as the number of graduates. So we finally finalize the scale and range for the given data. We have range 0 to 60, and we want the scale to be 1 unit. There are 20 graduates, so from 0, 20, 40, up to 60. And then finally, for step 7, we draw the bar graph that should represent each category with their respective numbers. So their bars are level depending on the graduates for that particular year. And lastly, how do we illustrate stacked bar graph? Let us take a look at this example. So we already have decided on the title for the bar graph, which is product revenue per branch. we already have drawn the horizontal axis and the vertical axis. Now let us label the vertical axis. Since we are following the horizontal orientation, we follow the horizontal bar graph steps. So since we want to find the product revenue per mall branch, our label on the vertical axis would be the mall branch. And then we write the names on the vertical axis, which is malls 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. For this example, we will label the horizontal axis as the revenue. And then we finalize the scale and range for the given data. So our range is from 0 to 30,000 pesos, since we are talking about money here. And we want the scale to be 1 unit is equals to 5,000 pesos. So finally, we draw the bar graph that should represent each category with their respective numbers.
A stacked bar graph may also be represented as a vertical graph. They look like this. Wait, there's more.
To summarize the information regarding bar graphs, we need first to know the definition, followed by the history and then its types. Bar charts or bar graph is simply a chart or graph that presents categorical data in a rectangular bars. It has heights or lengths that is proportional to the value that they represent. If we say bar graph, it uses or utilizes the use of rectangular bars. In order for us to know where the bar graphs came from, we need first to acknowledge its history. It was the Frenchman Nicole Resmy who used bar chart in the 14th century publication entitled The Latitude of Forms, wherein he plotted the velocity of a constantly moving object against time. Nicole Resmy plotted the time along with the horizontal axis and the velocity of each moment in time. Also, as a fundamental rule of most bar graphs used up to this day, we need to take note that each bar must be equal in width. Today, we can easily incorporate bar graphs into a variety of print and digital publications. Lastly, in order for us to easily comprehend the use of bar graphs, we need to know its types and other forms. There are two main types of bar graphs: the horizontal bar graph and the vertical bar graph. So what are the differences of these two types of graphs? If we say horizontal bar graph, then the data are displayed horizontally, while if the data are displayed vertically, then it is called the vertical bar graph. Moreover, we also need to appreciate the existence of the other forms of graph, the stock bar graph and the group bar graph. Stock bar graphs, in short term, presents a segment or separation but within a rectangular bar. On the other hand, the group bar graph displays the discrete value for two or more categorical data sets. We need to remember that stock and group bar graphs can also be presented horizontally or vertically. For the references, the group has citations and online sources. The group searched for authors who published works and articles regarding bar graphs. For the online sources, the group used the following: geographypoint.com, brilliant.org, jpower.com, QMath, infofactor.com, bizlo.com, mathonlymath.com, investopedia.com, mathworksheetcenter.com, alchemer.com, and exceljet.net.